It's Mr. Jackson with Edgar. Here to read, Edgar's going to run away. Here to read chapter 32 of Everwild by Neal Shusterman with permission from Simon Schuster. Chapter 32, The Low Approach. Nick had no idea that this day would lead him right into a vortex. And not just any vortex, but one of the most dangerous ones Everlost had to offer. All he knew was that nothing was going according to plan. The moment Nick had heard Allie was in Memphis, he was convinced that he was destined to find her. He was certain that he would arrive, and there she would be. How foolish. Did he expect her to be standing in the middle of Beale Street waiting for him? He had teams search for the city for days, battling the soul-numbing wind, but they didn't find a single afterlight in Memphis or a single clue as to Allie's whereabouts. A scout had returned from St. Louis claiming the Mississippi wind was no better in that city. He spoke of rumors that Mary Hightower was farther north, Michigan, perhaps Illinois. Charlie, who wanted to map more of the Midwest rails, was urging him to head north, but Nick wouldn't have it. They could face Mary without Allie, but having Allie there simply felt right. The sum of the parts would be greater than the whole. It would make them complete. It would make him complete. Allie the outcast is here, he told his restless troops. I can feel it. And he could. That connection, forged the moment they were born into Everlost, told him that she was right under his nose, if only he knew where to look. Keep searching, he told them, sounding more like an ogre by the minute. Then, on their 6th day in Memphis, Johnny O approached him with some news. She's coming, Johnny O said. By the tone of his voice and the look in his face and the way he cracked his knuckles, Nick knew he didn't mean Allie. Somehow, Mary knew we were here. Nick stood from his chair. It was getting increasingly harder for him to rise. And as he walked forward, he dragged his feet, leaving chocolate skid marks on the ground. How close is she? Nick asked. Johnny O cracked a knuckle, the sound as penetrating as a sonar ping. Stop that, Nick said. For all we know, she has a kid with big enough ears to hear that 100 miles away. Sorry, Johnny O looked deeply worried, and he was not an afterlight who was easily intimidated. How close is she? Nick asked again. You're not going to like it, Johnny O said. Just tell me. Johnny O let his large hands fall limp by his side. She's already in the city, less than 2 miles away. Nick stared at him incredulously. How could that be? Everywhere they went, they sent scouts for 10 miles in all directions, searching the skies for the Hindenburg. If there was one thing Mary Hightower could not do in an airship, it was sneak up on them. How could she get so close? I think maybe we were all looking too high, said Johnny O, nervously cracking his knuckles again. 2 miles away, 100 afterlights holding ropes heaved themselves forward, dragging behind them a giant airship. Inch by inch it moved, its belly practically crawling across the ground. Mary had been unconvinced that the western wind was the obstacle others claimed it was. Still, she had Speedo conduct the airship due south from Chicago and didn't turn west until they were over Tennessee airspace. As Memphis had begun to loom in the distance, Their airspeed slowed, and the airship's rudder strained hopelessly to keep them on a western course. When it became clear they would get no closer by air, Mary had Speedo set the ship down and arranged for an alternate method of propulsion. 100 afterlights were chosen for the team that would pull the Hindenburg forward towards Memphis, straining against an increasingly powerful wind. It was amazing how the ship that was supposed to be lighter than air could feel heavier to drag than a stone obelisk. Fortunately, obstacles in the living world were not obstacles at all for an airship passed through living forest. For the airship passed through living forest and buildings. And although it was difficult for the team of pullers to struggle for traction in the bog of the living world, Mary's children's always did what they were told. Within the airship, the rest of Mary's kids filled the rigid aluminum frame, resting on catwalks, finding space between the huge hydrogen bladders. Mary had briefed them personally on their part in the upcoming mission, and now an air of excitement filled the hollow spaces of the giant craft, like the static electricity that brought the airship to Everlost in the first place. She had left behind a dozen of her most well-trained followers in Chicago to tend to the sleeping Interlights, more than 200 of them when she left. She didn't know when she would return to Chicago, but when she did, there would be a fine community of afterlights, all brought up with the benefit of her teachings. As the grounded airship crawled towards Memphis, Mary tried to quell her own anticipation by taking the most frightened of her children to her in the starboard promenade and telling them whatever comforting stories she could remember from the living world. Fairy tales with endings she tweaked towards the positive. Happily ever afters fabricated where none existed before. Still, the children were on edge. What if the ogre attacks us before we get there? One of her children asked. He won't, Mary told him, for as much as Mary wanted the world to think that Nick was a ruthless monster, she knew he was not. He would try diplomacy before waging an all-out war. In fact, her whole strategy counted on it. At noon, she could see from her windows that the airship was no longer laboring forward, for the many afterlights straining to drag it had reached an impasse against the wind. This was as far as they would go, which meant the time had come to finally make an opening gesture to Nick. A letter, which she wrote and rewrote until she was sure it was just right. She crafted it to make sure he could read nothing between the lines. It would not reveal the feelings she still had for him, mainly because she couldn't be sure he still felt the same way for her. And besides, after today, those feelings would no longer matter. Once the letter was ready, she sealed it with old-fashioned sealing wax, stamped with an M. Then she called for one of her fastest runners. I need a brave messenger, Mary told her. Can I count on you? The girl nodded enthusiastically, thrilled to be able to please her. I need you to go to the ogre's train as quickly as you can. Speedo will tell you the way and bring the ogre this letter. You must hand it to the ogre personally and to no one else. The girl no longer looked enthusiastic, but terrified. So Mary put a gentle hand on her shoulder. The ogre is a terrible creature, to be sure, but this letter will keep you under my protection. As long as you are brave and true, and do not accept anything the ogre offers, I promise you will remain safe. Yes, Miss Mary. After the girl was gone, Mary took some time to revel in her plan and to mourn over it as well, because much would be lost today. Milos and the Skinjackers were already out in the world, using their talents and manifesting their own destinies on her behalf. The trap had been set for Nick, and all that remained was to spring it. "I'll set out on foot," Mary told Speedo. "You know what to do while I'm gone." Speedo didn't look pleased. "Why do you have to go alone?" "An entourage will invite suspicion," Mary answered. "I know what I'm doing." "Do you?" "I agree it's a good idea to meet with him on neutral ground, but why meet him at a vortex?" "Aren't vortexes dangerous?" "Vortices," corrected Mary, "are only dangerous if one doesn't understand the danger, and I do. We have reliable information on the Memphis vortex, and it is exactly what we need." She turned away from Speedo then, for she knew her face gave away certain emotions she preferred to keep to herself. She comforted herself with thoughts of her larger purpose in Everlost. All those chosen to lead were asked to make painful sacrifices to prove themselves worthy. And today, Mary would sacrifice her love. In her book, Caution, This Means You, Mary Hightower devotes the following bullet points to vortices. Vortices are both the bane and blessing of Everlost. On the positive side, unexpected objects have been known to cross into Everlost through one vortex or another. However, on a less pleasant note, vortices will affect afterlights in very undesirable ways. If you suspect that you've come across a vortex, it is best to steer clear of it and report it to an authority. Well, that was an exciting chapter. One thing I thought was interesting is that in this chapter, Nick is searching for his friend Allie, and Mary is searching for her friend, let's call him frenemy, Nick. They're both searching for people that they love. And I'm wondering, have you ever missed someone that you loved and that you cared about and gone searching for them? Or has anyone ever searched for you? How did that make you feel to be separated from somebody that you cared about? I also want to ask, just like a safety question, what would you do if you found yourself separated from the person that you cared about, or the person that cared for you, or the person that was taking care of you? What would you do to make sure that you stayed safe? Anyway, this is a great chapter. Excited to be reading to you again. And next, we're going to read chapter 33. Bye.